Today we're diving deep into a case that really, well, it spans multiple states and leaves behind a lot of unsettling questions.
Hmm.
We're talking about Daniel Lee Siebert,
Okay.
a name that might not be immediately familiar,
Right.
but his crimes really left a chilling mark on the communities he terrorized.
Yeah, what makes Siebert's case particularly fascinating, I think, is the sheer geographical spread
Right.
of his crimes. From coast to coast, he left a trail of victims,
Yeah,
making it so difficult for law enforcement to connect the dots.
absolutely.
And this, combined with his calculated use of aliases,
Oh, yeah,
really paints a picture of a highly mobile and cunning predator.
for sure. We've got court records, newspaper articles, even a mention in a true crime encyclopedia.
Hmm.
And the picture that emerges is, well, it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
Siebert confessed to at least 5 murders, but he's suspected of being involved in up to 12,
Wow.
spanning from 1979 to his capture in 1986.
Okay.
And ultimately, he died in prison in 2008 before his execution could be carried out.
And that's where it gets really intriguing.
Yeah.
The fact that he died before facing trial for many of these suspected murders, it leaves a lot of
Oh, for sure.
loose ends, unanswered questions for the families of potential victims, and a sense of unfinished business for
Absolutely.
those who investigated him.
So his criminal history, we can see it starts with a manslaughter conviction in Las Vegas back in 1979.
Right.
Now, the details on that particular case are a bit murky.
Yeah.
Not a lot of information readily available.
Even with limited information, I think that early conviction is a huge red flag.
Right.
It tells us that violence was already part of his repertoire,
Yeah,
even before his later, more horrific crimes.
for sure.
It begs the question, what happened between 1979 and this later string of murders? Was this a gradual escalation of violence, or were there other crimes
Right.
that we just aren't aware of?
And from Las Vegas, his trail goes cold for a bit until he pops up in California, Alabama, and even New Jersey.
Hmm.
So this isn't just, random wandering. It speaks to a level of premeditation
Right.
and attempt to avoid detection.
Exactly.
Right.
This kind of geographic mobility is a classic hallmark of what criminologists call a transient serial killer.
Okay.
They're constantly on the move, often blending into different communities
Wow.
to evade capture. It makes it so much more difficult for law enforcement to establish a pattern, connect the crimes, and ultimately track them down.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's fast forward to 1986 in Talladega, Alabama.
Okay.
This is where the case takes a truly horrific turn and the body count starts to rise.
Right.
Siebert murders Sherry Weathers and her 2 children in their apartment.
Oh, wow.
Weathers was a student at the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, and her absence from classes is what ultimately led to the discovery of their bodies.
The fact that he targeted a mother and her children in their own home, that adds such a layer of depravity
Yeah,
to this case.
it really does.
It raises questions about his victim selection. Was he specifically drawn to the vulnerability of this family, or was there something else at play?
Right. And sadly, Sherry Weathers wasn't his only victim at the Institute.
Oh, gosh.
Another student, Linda Jarman, was also found murdered in her apartment. This chilling parallel really ratchets up the tension
Yeah.
and fear in the community.
2 victims from the same institution, both found in their apartments. It's hard not to see a pattern there.
Yeah,
Was Siebert drawn to the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind for a specific reason?
yeah.
Was it the perceived vulnerability of the students, or was there something else that made this place a hunting ground for him?
And to make matters even more complicated, Linda Odom, Siebert's girlfriend, was reported missing around the same time. Her remains were discovered a month later.
Oh, wow.
So this adds a deeply personal element to the case.
Right.
It wasn't just strangers he was targeting, it was someone he supposedly knew, intimately.
This inclusion of a girlfriend in his list of victims throws a wrench in any easy profiling attempts.
Right.
Was this a crime of passion, or was he silencing someone who might have known too much?
Yeah.
Or could this be an attempt to throw off investigators? It really muddies the waters in terms of understanding his motives.
Absolutely. And the investigation also pointed toward his potential involvement in the death of Cheryl Evans, whose body was found around the same time in Calhoun County, Alabama. So this possible connection to Cheryl Evans further highlights, the difficulty in pinning down Siebert's victim selection.
Right.
If he is responsible for her death, what connects her to the other victims?
Right.
It's a puzzle with missing theories. And without a confession or more concrete evidence, we're left to speculate.
Exactly.
And as if the murders weren't disturbing enough, there's another layer to this whole thing. Remember, while committing these crimes, Siebert was using the alias Daniel Spence
Wow.
and working as an art teacher.
That detail is incredibly unsettling.
It really is.
It points to a calculated effort to integrate himself into these communities,
Right.
using a respected profession as a cover. It begs the question, What drew him to art as a profession?
Yeah.
Did he see it as a tool for manipulation or control?
The deception is astounding.
Yeah.
To maintain this double life for so long, teaching art to children while secretly committing these horrific acts,
Yeah.
it's almost beyond comprehension.
It speaks to a chilling level of compartmentalization.
Right.
It's a common trait among psychopaths, the ability to separate their outward persona from their inner darkness. But the choice of professional art teacher, that's something we need to unpack further.
Yeah.
Was it simply a means to an end, a way to access potential victims, or did it hold a deeper psychological significance for him?
Yeah, it's a truly bizarre juxtaposition, but thankfully, despite his attempts to stay hidden, justice eventually caught up with him.
Right, and the story of his capture is almost cinematic.
Yeah.
It took a 6-month manhunt, spanning multiple states,
Wow.
before a tip from a friend ultimately led to his arrest.
A friend he had even called while on the run.
Really?
That friend wisely reported him to the police,
Wow.
leading to his capture in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee.
Hmm.
Talk about a close call.
Yeah.
Had that friend not spoken up, who knows how many more victims there might have been.
That phone call was his undoing.
Right.
Police were able to trace his next call to a phone booth near a restaurant where he was working.
Wow.
He was apprehended the following day when he arrived for his shift.
It's a reminder that even in the age of advanced technology and sophisticated criminal tactics, sometimes it's the simple human connections that crack a case wide open.
Exactly, and that arrest finally brought an end to his reign of terror.
Right?
But the story doesn't end there.
Oh, no.
What happened next, in police custody, takes this case in a whole new direction.
Okay.
Siebert started talking,
Oh, boy.
and what he revealed sent shockwaves through the investigation.
Okay.
He confessed to a mind-blowing 12 or more murders.
Oh, wow.
That's right, and those confessions are where we'll pick up next. Stay with us as we delve into the complexities of Siebert's admissions and the lingering mysteries that surround them. Welcome back. We left off with Daniel Lee Siebert in custody, having just confessed to a staggering number of murders.
12 or more, to be exact.
Yeah.
Which is, way beyond the initial charges he was facing. It's mind-boggling to think about the scope of his potential crimes.
It really is.
Did he actually provide any specifics about these additional murders, or was it all just, vague admissions?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
While Siebert did admit to these, additional murders,
Right.
the level of detail he provided remains, well, it's unclear.
Okay.
Some sources suggest he offered specific information about some cases, while others claim his confessions were more general, and this lack of clarity fuels the ongoing debate surrounding his claims.
Right.
Were they all genuine, or was there an element of manipulation at play?
It makes you wonder what his endgame was. Was he trying to inflate his notoriety, to become some sort of legendary figure in the annals of true crime?
Right.
Or was there something else motivating him to confess to such a vast number of crimes?
That's where things get really interesting from a psychological perspective.
Okay.
Confession, especially in cases of serial killers, is a complex phenomenon.
Right.
There are theories that suggest some offenders confess out of a need for control, a desire to exert power even from behind bars.
Okay.
Others posit that it's a twisted form of catharsis,
Right.
a way to unburden themselves of guilt,
Yeah.
even if it's done in a manipulative or self-serving way.
So we're left with this massive cloud of uncertainty
Yeah.
hanging over the whole case.
Right.
It's incredibly frustrating for investigators, I'm sure, but even more so for the families of potential victims.
Yeah.
They may never get the closure they
Right.
desperately seek.
Absolutely. Siebert's death in prison essentially closed the book on many potential investigations.
Right.
And with the perpetrator gone, the opportunity to gather further evidence, corroborate those confessions, or bring closure to families of other possible victims, that was lost as well.
It's tragic. So many potential crimes, but without a trial, there's no definitive resolution. It's like a legal limbo,
Yeah.
a purgatory of unanswered questions.
And it raises questions about the criminal justice system's ability to handle these kinds of cases.
Right.
What happens when a suspect dies before facing a full trial for all their potential crimes? How do we balance the need for justice with the rights of the accused?
Heavy stuff. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's circle back to something we mentioned earlier, the psychology of Daniel Lee Siebert.
Okay?
We've talked about his crimes, his mobility, his deception, but what about the man himself?
Right.
What drove him to commit these horrific acts?
Right.
What can we glean from his background?
Well, that's where we run into a bit of a wall. Information about Siebert's early life and upbringing is unfortunately very limited. We know he was born in Mattoon, Illinois. But the specifics of his childhood, family dynamics, or potential trauma, Those details remain elusive.
So we're left to connect the dots
Right,
based on his behavior and the patterns we see in his crimes.
right.
It's like piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly. And it's important to be, careful about drawing definitive conclusions.
Right.
We can speculate, we can analyze, but ultimately we'll never have the full picture.
But I think it's natural for us to, to try and make sense of the all, to search for some explanation, some underlying reason for such unimaginable cruelty.
Of course. And there are theories and frameworks we can use to guide our understanding. For example, some experts believe that a combination of factors
Right.
can contribute to the development of a serial killer mindset.
Okay.
Things like a lack of empathy, a fascination with violence, and a desire for power and control. It's rarely, if ever, a single cause, but rather a confluence of influences.
Okay, so no easy answers there.
Right.
But let's shift our focus to his victims for a moment.
Okay.
Was there any discernible pattern in his victim selection?
Well, that's one of the most challenging aspects of Siebert's case. Defining a clear victim profile is difficult
Yeah,
because of the apparent diversity of his victims.
you're right. We have Sherry Weathers and her children, Linda Jarman, Linda Odom, and possibly Cheryl Evans.
Right.
It's a range of ages, backgrounds, and relationships
Exactly.
to Siebert.
And that makes it harder to draw definitive conclusions about what drew him to a particular victim.
Right.
Was it purely opportunity?
Yeah.
Was he targeting specific types of people?
Right.
Was there a psychological or emotional need he was trying to fulfill with each murder?
Yeah.
These are all valid questions, but without a more comprehensive understanding of his motives,
Right.
they're difficult to answer.
But we can at least look for potential connections, right?
Right.
For example, both Weathers and Jarman were students at the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind.
That's an important observation.
Yeah.
We can't ignore the fact that two of his confirmed victims
Right.
were from the same institution, both women.
Right.
This suggests that he may have been drawn to this particular community for some reason.
Yeah.
Was it the perceived vulnerability of the students?
Right.
Or was there something else, something more specific, that drew him to this place?
And then you have Linda Odom, his girlfriend, who was also murdered. That suggests he wasn't just targeting strangers. He was willing to kill someone he supposedly knew intimately.
Right. The inclusion of a girlfriend among his victims
Yeah.
muddies the waters even further.
Right.
Was this a crime of passion,
Right.
a way to silence a potential witness, or something else entirely?
Yeah.
It introduces a level of complexity
Yeah.
that defies easy categorizations.
And what about Cheryl Evans? Does her case fit into any potential pattern?
Unfortunately, the details surrounding Cheryl Evans' death are still very murky.
Right.
While investigators suspected Siebert was involved,
Hmm.
they were never able to conclusively link him to her murder.
It's frustrating that some of these cases may forever remain unsolved.
That's the nature of these complex, multi-jurisdictional investigations.
Right.
Sometimes the pieces just don't fit together neatly.
Okay, so we've talked about his potential motives, his victims, but what about his mobility?
Right.
He committed crimes in multiple states.
Yeah.
What was driving that constant movement?
As we discussed earlier, his constant relocation was likely a tactical decision to avoid detection.
Okay.
By moving from state to state, he could stay one step ahead of law enforcement,
Right.
making it more difficult to connect his crimes.
Yeah.
It's a classic tactic employed by many transient serial killers.
It's like he was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse.
Right?
With the authorities always on the move, always looking over his shoulder.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And it's a game that many serial killers play.
Right.
They thrive on the thrill of the chase, the feeling of power and control that comes from outsmarting the authorities.
But even the most cutting criminals make mistakes.
Exactly.
Right.
And in Siebert's case, it was his decision to contact a friend that ultimately led to his downfall.
Right.
That one phone call, that one moment of human connection proved to be his undoing.
It's a reminder that even in the age of, advanced technology and sophisticated criminal tactics, sometimes it's the simplest things that crack a case wide open.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of human intelligence,
Right.
of community involvement,
Yeah.
and the role that even seemingly insignificant details
Right.
can play in bringing a perpetrator to justice.
Let's take a moment to reflect on the legal aftermath of Siebert's capture
Okay.
and the lasting impact his crimes had on the communities he terrorized.
A crucial aspect of this story is that despite his capture and confessions, many of Siebert's suspected crimes remained unresolved
Right.
due to his death before trial.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. Siebert's death essentially created a legal dead end for many of the potential cases against him. It must be incredibly difficult for the families of those potential victims, knowing they may never have
Right.
concrete answers about their loved one's fate.
It's a tragedy on multiple levels. Not only were lives lost, but the opportunity for a full accounting,
Right.
for justice to be served through the legal process, that was lost as well.
Right, because even if there's strong suspicions, even if there are confessions, without the perpetrator being alive to stand trial,
Yeah,
it's like the legal system hits a brick wall.
exactly. The burden of proof in a criminal case is incredibly high, and rightly so.
Yeah,
But when the accused dies, the possibility of meeting that burden of proof,
right.
of presenting evidence and arguments in a court of law, that vanishes as well.
It's like the ultimate injustice, a perpetrator escaping accountability for their actions because of their own mortality.
Right.
And the families of the victims are left with this gaping wound of unresolved grief and unanswered questions.
It highlights the profound limitations
Yeah,
of our legal system in these extreme
for
circumstances.
sure.
And it forces us to grapple with the complexities of seeking justice when the traditional avenues are closed off.
It's heavy stuff, but let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the broader impact of Siebert's crimes.
Okay?
I mean, imagine the fear and anxiety that must have gripped these communities
Right.
as a serial killer roamed free, especially for those living in the areas where he was active.
The psychological toll that a case like this takes on a community is immense.
Right.
It's not just the direct victims who suffer, it's a ripple effect
Yeah.
that touches everyone.
Right.
The sense of safety is shattered, people start questioning their surroundings,
Yeah.
and there's a heightened sense of vulnerability that can linger for years, even decades.
You're right. It erodes the fabric of trust within a community. People become more suspicious, more guarded, and that can have a lasting impact on the social dynamics of a place.
And it often leads to a kind of collective trauma.
Right.
Everyone in the community is impacted in some way,
Yeah.
even if they weren't directly victimized.
Right.
They've lived through this terrifying ordeal,
Yeah.
and it leaves a scar on the collective psyche.
So what can be done to support these communities? How do they even begin to heal and rebuild after something like this?
It's a long and challenging process, but there are things that can help.
Right.
Open communication is key.
Yeah.
Creating spaces where people can share their fears, their grief, their anger without judgment.
Yeah.
Access to mental health resources is also crucial.
Absolutely.
Providing professional support to those who are struggling to cope with the emotional fallout,
For sure.
and community-based initiatives
Right.
that focus on restoring a sense of safety and fostering resilience. Those are vital as well.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed, addressing the immediate emotional needs of the community
Right.
while also working towards long-term healing and rebuilding trust.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that healing takes time.
Right.
There's no quick fix, no magic formula.
Yeah.
It's a gradual process that requires patience, compassion, and a commitment to supporting one another.
As we conclude our deep dive into the life and crimes of Daniel Lee Siebert, I'm struck by the sheer complexity of this case.
Yeah.
It's not just a story about a serial killer, it's a story about the enduring impact of violence, the flaws in our systems, and the resilience of the human spirit.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves in the society we live in.
right,
And while we may never have all the answers,
right.
engaging in these difficult conversations
Mm.
is a crucial step towards understanding, prevention, and ultimately healing.
Siebert's case may be closed, but the conversations it sparks, the questions it raises about the nature of evil, the pursuit of justice, and the long-lasting impact of trauma, those conversations need to continue.
Absolutely. It's about learning from the past to create a safer future.
Well said, and for our listeners, we leave you with this. Daniel Lee Siebert's story, while disturbing, is a stark reminder
Yeah.
of the importance of vigilance, community support, and never forgetting the victims. Take this knowledge, reflect on it, and use it to make your own corner of the world a little bit safer, a little bit more compassionate.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Till next time, stay curious and stay informed.